Welcome to the Live Your Possible podcast, the show about sparking and discovering endless possibilities where we work, live, and play. A safe place where we can help you peel back the cover to what may be blocking you from being your most authentic and happiest self.
Hello, everybody. Our guest today is Kathryn Britton. Her clients call her the midwife of words. She has helped hundreds of people, including myself, complete writing projects, big and small. Her own publications include books and articles about computer science, coaching, and applied positive psychology. Kathryn has been an English major, a software engineer, an inventor, an editor, and an executive coach. Now Kathryn writes, edits, and coaches writers to find their authentic writing voices, build confidence, and produce writing that can change the world. Listen closely to how our writing tips and techniques will do just that. Her approach welcomes our unique differences to be heard and embraced in a safe, supportive way that turns vulnerabilities into possibilities. Writing is a way to use our pain in productive ways to help heal others, and by doing that, we heal ourselves. I hope she sparks you onto a writing journey that helps you change the world forever and wherever you are. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Kathryn, to the Live Your Possible podcast. It's so great to see you again. Welcome.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
We're so excited. We're jumping right in already. I love it.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been engaged in different ways from some writing workshops. And I got to tell you, before we get into details about that and how thankful I am about those experiences, I'd love to know what you're passionate about these days.
Well, I think my biggest passion right now is helping other people capture the things that are important to them in their lives, whether that is in a written form or a spoken form. For example, I think you're capturing somewhat of what you're passionate about in these podcasts. But I've become very aware of the fact that we each are living very, very unique lives, and that those lives, we're creating a history, and that history is one thing piled on another. But a lot of that fades into the distance. And if you look back, you forget, well, what was it I was doing before? Or why did I do this? Or what led me here? Or what was my mother like at my age? All of these things start to fade. And for me, it's important for people to capture at least some of these minutes so that they can return and visit their own histories. I happen to have in my closet the letters that people sent me back in the days when people used to send letters. And one of the things I've been doing is going through and finding the letters from a particular friend and packaging them up and putting them in a box and mailing them off to that person and saying, would you like to revisit yourself when you were 17, 20, 30 years old? Just see what was on your mind at the time. So I think a lot about that question of capturing our own personal histories as an important part of contributing to the quality of our own lives.
Yeah, it captures our legacy too for folks to experience, maybe from within our families or our friends. And I love that you're sending those letters back to reflect and think about who we were back then. And gosh, I think we should all start writing letters again. Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, yes, but I suppose you could troll through your email, and find interesting things from the past, but it's a little different than when you're putting pen to paper.
Yeah, emails tend to be shorter, maybe not as, emotional. I don't know. What do you think? What's different about it these days, do you think?
Well, the emails, I think, tend a lot of times to be more sort of transactional. You don't sit down as much if you're going to talk to somebody, people tend to pick up the phone and have a conversation. And of course, the phone conversations that we have they're gone, unless you happen to be somebody who records your conversations, which most of us don't. So it's just interesting to think about how the different properties of what we're doing and how much history, how much of a trail they leave behind them.
Yeah, we all tend to just kind of live kind of forward. And I wonder if we could grow more based on knowing who we were, where we've come. And I do, you're right. I'd like to learn from my guests about that. Like, what are the challenges that they had to overcome, or how did they get here? So I'm curious. I'm going to ask that question. Like, how did you get to this point where you're helping people like look at life this way. Look at those key moments. Like, what are some of the key moments that have gone through your life? Because I think you've had a fascinating background, and I'd love to know what kind of stands out to you.
One of the things I can say about myself is I don't really have a very goal-directed nature. So I am not somebody who, when I was a teenager, I said, this is what I want to do. This is who I want to be. At that time I was when I was in high school, remember taking SATs, those whatever. My scores for math, science, or for math and verbal were almost identical. So it was like I was, on a teeter-totter like this. And I happened to have a really great English teacher, and I happened to not have a great math teacher. And so when I went off to college, I thought, okay, I'll become a literature. I will go into literature. I'll become a comparative literature professor someday. So I studied French, I studied German, I studied Italian. I took Old English. I spent one entire quarter translating Beowulf into modern English. So, but then I got to the end of my time as a undergraduate, and I thought, there's a line of poetry, I think it's W.H. Auden, where he says, those did not contribute, they'd only diluted. I'm not getting the words exactly right, but that I looked at it and I thought, what would I contribute in this area? Or would I be just another dilution of the whole value of all this literature? So I happened to be taking a course that was too hard for me my last year in college. I think it was graduate level Chaucer, and it was just, I couldn't do it. So I dropped out and I had to pick up another course, and I picked up computer science at a beginning programming class. It was so much fun that from there I went on to taking another course, and then I went to graduate school in computer science. And then I became a software engineer, which I was for about 30 years. So I found that the whole question of making things, one of my professors when I was in graduate school talked about it as pure thought, as programming is dealing with pure thought stuff. And I love that idea of dealing with pure thought stuff. Well, after a while, you find yourself, after 30 years, you start feeling like, is this really all I want in life? Do I want it to be written on my tombstone that she helped make money for IBM? And I thought, not really. I'd like to be able to be making a contribution in a different way, one that I could feel would be a legacy that would be important. So I went back to school and got a master's degree in applied positive psychology, which it was the very first year of the program. I was part of, I think, a sort of experimental bunch, and they had decided they wanted to hire people who were already established in their careers with the idea that they would send them back into their organizations to make a difference. I went back to IBM after getting my master's, and I spent about 9 months working on team well-being. But at one point, it occurred to me that this is like trying to change the direction of the Titanic with an oar, at the side. It just didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. So I went from there to becoming a coach, and a life coach, and then an executive coach, and that was okay, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So as you can see, I'm sort of wandering through. Opportunities present themselves. I take the opportunity. I see where it leads me. And then from there, I figure out, okay, is this me or is this not me? And after a while, I realized I had learned a technique for writers' workshops while I was still at IBM. And that technique, I decided to put into practice. And it took me a long time to get the nerve up to actually get it going. But I got a group of people together and said, I'd like to experiment with using this writer's workshop technique. And it ended up being my most successful experiment in the course of my career. I have gone from having one workshop that had 8 people in it to now I think I've got 11 or 12 workshops, each of which has either 3 or 4 people in it. So it's like I found that bringing people together to help them support each other as they were writing was a really important step to help people liberate their voices. In general, I find that people want to have written, but they don't necessarily enjoy the writing itself. Well, I've gotten to the point through a lot of trial and error where I actually really, really enjoy writing. So part of what my plan is to try and help people get over the barriers so that they can get to the point where they feel really energized by the action of putting their words down, of collecting their words. So that was kind of a quick life history. And leave any questions in your mind?
I have a lot. First question, it relates to the actual workshop. So you said it was the greatest experiment. How did that go? And how similar or different is it, with your current workshops? Because, I'm honored and blessed to have been a member of, your workshops, which we can get into separately in a minute. I'm just curious, how did that go and how similar or different?
Well, I started out with a group of 8, and then I found that was too big. And so what I ended up doing was experimenting with how many people in a group, how often people submit. But the basic idea of the submission, of the review, the basic idea remains the same. Okay, let's assume that you've submitted a piece of writing, okay, which you have. So it's not too hard for you to imagine. So you submitted a piece of writing. I send it out to the people in your group so that they get it ahead of time, so that they can read it and mark it up a little bit so they're ready to talk about it. Nobody owes you anything written. All you get is the review itself, where people speak. You come into the review and we ask you to introduce it briefly. Not tell us what it's about, because we're going to tell you, but instead just say, this is a blog post, this is a piece of my book, this is just some writing that I'm doing and I'm not sure what to do with it, and I'd love to have your ideas. So whatever it is that's on your mind. So then we ask you to read a paragraph so we hear a little bit of it in your voice. And then we ask you to become a fly on the wall, or as some of my people have been saying recently, a butterfly on the wall, since that sort of is more appealing than being a fly. But that means you turn off your video, you turn off your sound, and just listen. And the benefit of that to you is you don't have to be thinking of answers. You don't have to be deciding, this is what I want to say about that. You just can take it in my opinion, is very liberating, because it means that, let me tell you, I was in hundreds, probably thousands of reviews while I worked for IBM. And in all of them, you're sitting there and people are making comments and you're immediately trying to counter those comments or respond to those comments in one way or another. This allows you to take it in without having to immediately respond. So then we go through 3 rounds. The first round, we tell you what it's about or how it impacted us. So you get a sense, you when you're writing, a lot of times it's a very lonely experience. There's just you and your keyboard. This is a way for you to get a sense of what are my words, how do my words affect people? What are they seeing in what I'm writing? Are they getting the takeaway that I intended them to get? So it's your chance to actually see a group of people responding to what you wrote. Then we go on to the second round, which is what makes this piece of writing strong? And I found when I first started doing this that I would just call on people, and each one would go through their entire list of strengths. And by the time you got to the last person, it's like, well, what's left for me to say? So I found what works even better is to ask each person to give their top strength and then to open up the floor for discussion. So it's more dynamic and it's not just me calling on everybody. And then once we've collected all of those strengths, then I say, are we ready to go on? And we go on to the final round, which is what would make this even stronger. Now, you'll notice I don't say what needs to be fixed, what's broken, what's whatever, but the question is, we got a strong piece of writing. The implication is we got a strong piece of writing. How do we make it even stronger? And then once again, I call on people for their top suggestion and then open the floor for discussion. So that's the approach. And now I've been doing it for 10 years. And I've had about 3,900 pieces of writing go through this process. And the pieces of writing have ranged from song lyrics and poetry to web copy to brochures for a candy company to articles for the web, LinkedIn articles, blog posts, whatever, to book chapters. So, and recently I've been having a couple of fiction books, and I'm less expert myself on fiction writing, but I can share how I, as a reader, see what I'm reading. And I guess draw on all those years and years of studying literature back when I was in college.
I love the workshops. As a participant, I had a few chapters go through, our groups, and I've had blog posts. I've had the writing for the opening for this podcast. Just trying to see how the writing is, how the messages might be perceived, and there's also some other articles that I've written that are around inclusion and being vulnerable with stepping in differently and taking action with things that I absolutely am passionate about and believe in. So I have really enjoyed the process of participating in the workshop. And I have to tell you, like, I have a book that's out there, as you know, and your team and the workshops helped me, not with every chapter, but yet several of them. More importantly, it gave me more confidence in what I put together. And it's less about the exact words, because like you're trying to do, you're trying to get my voice to be heard the way my voice is, rather than telling me to be
Right.
somebody else, which I value greatly. And I had self-doubt with my writing, and going through challenges with some friends on doing daily writing, and going through these workshops. And the workshops are very positive. Like, it sounds like you applied that positive psychology thinking into this approach, because like you said, it's let's identify strength, what makes it strong, what can make it better. It's all about improvement. It's about that open mindset to getting it better, learning to make it stronger, to make sure that our voices are heard the way we want it to be heard. So I'm grateful, and I got to tell you, like, you've had a huge impact on my life and getting myself to get through and finish the process of writing the book and actually publishing the book. So I don't know if you realize that, but you're a big part of that. So I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your mentioning that. And the thought crossed my mind as you were talking that one of the things that I found really interesting about the piece that you brought to be reviewed was how open you were to the feedback from people that what you were saying was not received exactly the way you intended it. And your openness to be, your willingness to kind of say, oh, okay, I hadn't really thought about the fact that people might see it like that, and to sort of open up and broaden your approach. And so I think that openness, but I think that the process also helped you be open to the feedback as well. So you brought a willingness to learn to the experience, and the group brought a warmth, but kind of gave you some kind of interesting feedback, didn't they?
I was very direct, and it didn't feel good at first. Yet, to your point, my intention of being there is to make it better, to not be right, to get it right. So it's heard for what it is, and my heart is out there the way I'm intending. I was kind of guarding some things based on the words I was using. I wasn't telling the story so directly, and so let's just say honestly, because I was being vulnerable in that example. So the process makes it safe to have those conversations, and it allowed me to be open and more accepting. And you're spot on. And I love how you described back at IBM, where if we're part of a meeting or wherever we are, we tend to defend our position. We kind of rationalize when people are talking about something we did or we created. This exercise you have in the workshop is an amazing listening exercise, because you're this butterfly on the wall and you're listening. You're really just listening, and you're listening for not only what people are saying, yet you're actually seeing the thoughtfulness that people are putting behind it. Because people read these in advance, they give it real thought, and it's real care. You develop relationships in these workshops. And, again, I learned from that alone, just to say, I know people have my best interests in mind. They're trying to make it better, trying to get my voices to be heard the way they think I'm trying to get the words out in the world. So I love it. The listening exercise, the safety, the positive psychology. What a great approach.
I think it's a great skill to develop, to actually listen to people without going into response mode right away. And of course, there's a lot of the politics in a business situation where you're defending yourself, right? So thinking about your response simultaneously with listening to somebody else speak makes it a little bit harder for you to let yourself be changed by what you hear. And if we all go into conversations unwilling to be changed by what we hear, then all we're doing is making noise at each other. And so it's important to develop that skill of being able to listen and take in what people are saying about something of our own creation, and to be able to take that in without immediately feeling like we've got to deflect it, change it, challenge it, whatever. So maybe I hadn't really thought of it this way, but maybe the part of what is the value of the workshop approach for people beyond getting their writing responded to is a chance to practice listening without being on the hook to respond right away. I hadn't thought of it that way.
It's a great perspective. And, we live in a society right now where everybody's reacting to words, whereas we're kind of divisive, or we kind of hold to a position. And, the form of what you're saying, it's a level of inclusiveness. The way I think about inclusiveness is an act of discovery. It's being open-minded, like we're willing to take in other perspectives and different ideas. Yet I always tie in curiosity to that, because curiosity is the willingness to take the perspective and to actually do something with it. Not just to say, hey, I'm open-minded, I have good intentions. Well, if you're not going to do anything with it, then it's just words. Or if I hear words that maybe I don't agree with, or that maybe kind of get the hair on the back of my neck to go up, that make me get defensive, or it creates a political issue, like we got to slow down and not react or respond so quickly like that. We got to just be open-minded, to your point, to say, well, what about this could make this better? What about this could change the perspective and make it more aligned to my authentic view, and make sure I'm being heard, yet not changing my delivery or what I'm trying to get out there into the world, be it a workshop or be it something at a meeting. Because at meetings, if people are really over talking or talking on behalf of people shut down too. That's another way people are they shut down, and they kind of do the old, it is what it is.
Right. Well, this is one of the things that I used to think about a lot when I was at IBM, is that there are big status differences between people. And people who are high status tend to talk off the top of their heads. And sometimes the things they say, people take them and run with them as if they were Moses being handed the tablets on the mountain. And low status people tend to rehearse what they have to say so long in their own minds that the opportunity to say it disappears before they actually get it right. So it has occurred to me, and I had the experience there. I was at IBM long enough that I went from being a low status person to being a pretty high status person by the time I left. And so I saw what it was like at both ends of that spectrum. And it seems to me that one of the things that would be really valuable to do in an organization is to try and do some level setting and make it easier for people to hear the voices of the low status people, and maybe make it so that people respond less uncritically to the things that the high status people say, because sometimes they say some real nonsense. And so to be able to and I don't have a recipe for this, for how to do that in organizations, but I think an awareness of status, and that if you happen to be somebody who you're running a meeting and you're in control of what's going on, that there are things you can do that will level the status a bit. Like you can actually call on people who are low status people and let there be silence as they finish their thinking. Silence doesn't necessarily break things. It can actually be a time for other people to be thinking as well. And perhaps when you've got the people, we had a couple of really belligerent, technical, very top level people. And the joke was that when the elephants dance, the mice get out of the way. Well, you don't want to have an organization where you got elephants dancing or elephants fighting. You want so that the mice have to get out of the way. If you've got that going on, then you've got some work to do.
Yeah, that's not a culture that I want to be in, to be honest. But yeah, that's no fun. Going back to, your point, I do think it's so critical that we step in and listen, and we invite folks in. There are a bunch of exercises that can be performed to engage and to ask people's perspectives. And that's really an act of inclusion, for any leader, for any person in the community. I also think you do that, a bit in your book, where you ask people if they get stuck for writing, or if people have ideas of thinking. Like, I think there's even creative tools in there that not only does it help with writing, but it could help leaders to say, hey, let's put ideas on a sticky and put it up on the board. So some people that might be maybe a little bit more introverted or not feeling as safe. I would love to talk about your book, because I love your book, and thank you for mentioning me in the book as well. Any comments on that last point before we go to your book?
Well, I will say that one of the experiments in the book is one that I learned at IBM when we were doing a joint writing project. And that's the one that you mentioned with the yellow stickies. And the idea is that to brainstorm, and you can brainstorm together in a group. And I've actually done this. We did after we finished building one product, we had a patent mining session where we were looking for ideas that might be patentable in what we had done. And we got together in a room, probably 20 people, and we used this technique where you set a timer and then you have people sit there doing nothing for, I think in this case, 5 minutes. I didn't think I could actually do the full 10 minutes that's recommended in the book, but 5 minutes, sit there doing absolutely nothing. And then once the timer goes off, to take the yellow stickies and start writing their ideas, just a few words per idea on a yellow sticky, and then take it off and then write the next one and take it off and write the next one and take it off. And then you actually have people put those on the board and start putting them together in a shape and say, oh, these two ideas go together, moving the little stickies around and creating shapes on a whiteboard with them or whatever. That can also stimulate thinking about ideas. I think one of the things that I said in the book that was, to me, writing is actually like playing with clay, that you get the words and you kind of, it's like you've got, you're manipulating it, and you're trying this and you're taking a piece and you're moving it over there and whatever. So that sense of bringing in the tactile and the other senses into the process of writing, I think, can also be important. Getting back to writing from the whole question of collecting ideas.
Yeah, and now it ties into your other point too about silence. These exercises could be done in silence or it could be out loud. Just having that moment to think, and then your willingness to write it down or speak up. And if it's not the writing exercise, I think that silence piece allows us to actually step in. Like sometimes, like I'll want to respond. Maybe you haven't seen this at workshops because I like to jump in. Yeah, sometimes I that silence or that space allows me to get the courage enough to put an idea out there. Sometimes when the idea is way out there, or maybe it's a thought that maybe it's going to go against the elephant in the room, right? And there's been moments where I've had to say certain things because that's who I am now. Like I believe in certain things, and I believe that we need to talk about the things that are getting in the way of having joy in the workplace. But like this, your book is fabulous. Like I'd love for you to share with the audience, what is your intention with the book, and what do you hope people get out of it, and encourage folks to dive in?
Well, I hadn't intended to write a book, but then I had a particular client, a writing client, somebody who wanted to write more. And we were working back and forth, and nothing was happening. He wasn't getting stuff done. So I said to him one day, sit, write, share, trying to make it, three imperatives, whatever, sit, write, share. And his response was, you should turn that into a book. And that idea bounced around in my head for a while. So it wasn't an immediate thing like, oh, okay, I got to write this book. But then I started figuring out that my whole approach to working with people on writing is a recognition that we're all different and we aren't all going to do things the same way. But there are certain things that are in common between the way, there are certain skills or certain things you can learn that actually help you. So I thought, well, what if I acknowledge both the fact that we're different and the fact that there are common elements, and approach this as a matter of collecting experiments that people could try. So using that idea of sit, write, and share, I thought, well, sit, that's a little bit like meditation, right? Actually getting yourself to be in the chair to get the writing done. It's a little funny. I have a standing desk, so I don't actually sit in a chair to get writing done, but most people think of it as sitting to get the writing done. So there are ways to deal with the fear. There are ways to build habits. There are ways to get inspiration. There are ways to actually get yourself to sit down and do the writing that you want to do. There are ways to figure out what it is you want to write. So that's one important part of it. And I think I came up with 13 experiments in that area, which are all things that you can try that will help you get yourself to actually do the writing. So that's important. Then when you start with the writing, the question is, how do you actually do it? And I found that the best way of thinking about the write process is to divide it up into 3 stages. One stage is doing the imagining and, kind of letting your brain, letting ideas bubble up, realizing that you've got a whole well of creativity, probably in the unconscious part of your mind. And that part of what you want to do is to open up the doors so that these ideas can pop into your head and you can capture them and then take them and see where they lead you. And so that's the imagine part. And I realized that I do a lot of my own writing when I'm washing dishes, or I'm going for a walk, or I'm pulling weeds, or I have ideas sort of floating around in my head, and I'm kind of trying on different ways of putting them together. And well, maybe I could actually add in this idea, whatever. So that's the imagining. The drafting is the ability to actually just do a draft, a rough draft. Anne Lamott refers to it as shitty first drafts. And she says, shitty first drafts allow writers to do pretty good second drafts and terrific third drafts. And so I think of that as the ability to actually turn your perfectionism off, put down on the page just what comes out, let it come out, and tell that editor that wants to be picky about, have you got the right tense? Are you spelling things right? Is this the right order? All of that. You'll get your turn later. Right now, I'm just going to let the ideas flow. I had an experience just this last week where a very, very close friend of mine who's illustrating a children's book and has been very, very stalled by perfectionism told me that she pulled out my book. She says she uses my book as her source of inspiration. She pulled out my book and just opened it, and it turned to the page where it says, draft without editing. So she let herself draw one of her pictures without worrying about whether it was just right. And I think there are a lot of people that need to have the ability to turn their perfectionism off. Okay. And then the final stage is to edit. And most people think, oh, what a boring stage. Oh, how boring to take what you write and to edit it. I've started thinking of it as an act of love. And so it's an act of love for your audience, because you're going through and you're thinking about, how can I make this easier for people to easier, more pleasurable, more illuminating for other people who are reading it. It's also an act of love for yourself, in that you're investing your time to take what you've come up with, your ideas, and put them in a form that you can be proud of. And so I find people usually find it fairly startling. I did a workshop on writing this summer for a large group of people, and I opened the editing section with editing as an act of love, and I got these looks like, what? But that, if you think of it in that way, then you can, and then if you think also of doing it in stages, right? So don't try to just edit all the way through, but instead make one pass through and say, is the shape right? Have I got the right pieces? Are they in the right order? And not to worry about getting the words exactly right or the punctuation exactly right, because you might find while you're doing this first operation that you pull a paragraph out and just bit bucket it. You might say, I don't really need to say that. So why polish it if you're not going to keep it? So anyway, I think there's about, I can't remember, there's 55 total experiments. I think 26. There are 26 write experiments. And so these are all activities to get your imagination going, to get your drafting going, and to get your editing going. So the final section of the book is about sharing your writing. Now, one of the things people tell me is writing is really lonely. You're in a room by yourself, you're doing it, you feel alone in the process of writing. But which is really rather funny, because the whole purpose of writing is to share what you've got with either your future self. If you're writing a journal and nobody else is ever going to see it, you're still writing for your future self. But you also, there's, getting your words out into the world. There's getting support and feedback from other people. There's getting reviews. I think there are 2 experiments in the book that are around the whole process of writers' workshops. There's making a decision about how you're going to publish, if you're going to publish. So if you're going to publish a book, are you going to self-publish it? Are you going to do a hybrid self-publish? Are you going to look for a publisher? All of these are good ways to go, and they each have their advantages and disadvantages. So there's a couple of experiments to help you navigate through that process of deciding which approach you want to take. So, and then at the very end is, of course, the whole launch and make sure people know about your book. And so, because you can write a wonderful book, but if nobody knows about it, it can't have a big effect. So that's, it's most people that I know have trouble with this whole question of how do I market what I do, and how do I get to people? And even though all marketing instructors will tell you, you can't benefit other people if they don't know that you exist or they don't know what you do, it's still hard for people to take those steps. You know that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. These are all achievable, doable steps. I think breaking them down like you're talking about makes it more possible, makes it more kind of within reach. It doesn't feel as overwhelming because and that's how your book is broken down. It's in different steps, different stages. Like you said, you could pull it up. It's a guide. It's available to you. Oh my God, I'm stuck today. I can't write. How do I spark that? Or how do I build a better habit to get this done or to move to the next phase? And those things definitely have helped me. So I could definitely relate. And for me, I had to build a habit of writing every single day. And it doesn't mean I was just writing in that imagine phase. There were days where I'd start writing. I said to myself that I would commit every day at least 15 minutes. There were days where I struggled. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to jot down ideas. I'm going to jump back to the imagine phase and just write down 3 or 4 words. Like I want to talk about, inclusive society, or I want to do these things. And it was productive. The next day I would start to write, and I would write for an hour and a half because it was a story connected to something that was really meaningful and a message I wanted to get out. Like I turned off my editor, like you said, but yet I just let it flow. And all these things happen, day to day. It's different. Each day is different. And I didn't judge myself. I had to let myself go, that self-doubt and judgment every day. Like if I didn't get somewhere really quickly, I try not to get frustrated. I try not to let like the writer's block get in the way. And I try to use your book and try to get creative each day, just so I had that habit formed. It allowed me to really get to this place of finishing the book and really helped me get to the place where I am today.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that. It's always really nice to hear that, as from your book and the reception your book got. It's always wonderful to hear that you've had an impact on people. I wanted to mention something that I created to go with the book. It's a workbook.
Love it.
And it's available. All you do is go to sitwriteshare.com and then sign up at the bottom and you can get it. But what I figured out that I decided I wanted to do as a something to give along with the book was to give people a set of questions they could use to evaluate, well, where am I relative to writing? And in particular, there are questions like, well, there are statements, and the question you go through and you say, can I say that or not? So one statement might be, I have a clear idea of the purpose I want to achieve by writing. And if you can say that, then you write your purpose down and go on. If you can't say it, then there's pointers to the experiments in the book that might help you actually be able to say yes to that statement. So the interesting thing about it is that when I first started writing it, I found I was expressing things in terms of, well, what are my problems? And I went back later and reframed everything in terms of each one is a recognition of I have achieved this. And if you say no, well, that's fine. There's experiments you can try to help you with it. But it allows you to kind of realize, okay, I'm further along than I thought I was. So one question is, I start writing sessions efficiently. And if you sit down and a lot of people do this, they sit down and it's like, oh, what am I going to do today? I said I was going to write for 15 minutes. What am I going to do? So I've got a couple of suggestions about how to do that. Actually, I have 4 suggestions about how to do that. So anyway, they're all references to the experiments in the book.
Yeah, that's great. Like even that example is a good one because it's like, as you think about, hey, what am I going to write about today? As you think about it, and maybe in your session today and you answer those questions yourself, it's on the front of your mind. So over the next 24 hours, when you sit, for me, I would do it late in the morning. I'd get up around 5:15, get my cup of coffee, and I would plan to write for the 15 minutes, sometimes, longer. Yet, as I kind of thought about it, I was setting myself up to be thinking about it, like you said, unconsciously. I was at work doing other things, or I was coaching my kids' sports or whatever it was, that ideas were coming to me. My memories were coming to me that I thought were powerful enough to want to write about it the next day. And I was excited to get up and write. Like, to me, I was not ever someone that said, oh, I love writing, or I'm going to write a book one day. Never had those aspirations, to the point where now I love getting up to write about something, or I love to talk about the story, or trying to make a connection, to your point about having an impact on someone else. And that's the beauty of writing, in my opinion. Like, I had some really good conversations with some friends, and did some challenges in particular around daily writing challenges, and sharing like some of the learnings, not the details, but what did I feel? What did I notice? What did I see? And as I was sharing that, people would share that back with me. A good friend, Donna, who's in my book, she was there listening to say, hey, what did you learn? What joy did you get out of it? What did you, kind of going back in time, what did you overcome from an experience? And we actually set each other up for, hey, why don't we write for 30 days and see what happens? She ended up writing a book. She hasn't published hers yet. I ended up writing a business plan that got me excited to write a book that took, as you know, several years to get it done, because I really, really wanted to outline this and take my time and bring a bunch of experiences together. This person was also someone I interviewed on my podcast, and she had shared with me that writing, even though she hasn't published yet, writing for her allowed her to actually free herself from some of the darkness that she had lived growing up, some of the things that happened to her that she experienced that really was kind of scary and daunting. And her writing, she says, really allowed her to kind of overcome it, allowed her to say, this is real, I accept this. And it allowed her to kind of put it there so she could begin her healing and her compassion and forgiveness that she needed to allow for herself to open up her life differently. So to me, writing has such profound impacts on our lives. Not only does it allow us to leave a legacy, but allows us to live life differently. And I'm curious, Kathryn, have you seen other folks experience this, or have people shared with you stories where people said, oh my God, writing has done X, Y, or Z? Like, what have you heard? What can you share with our audience that they could relate to?
Well, it's interesting. For some reason, what popped into my mind was someone that has just recently started writers' workshops and is writing about experiences living in a war zone. And the interesting thing about reading it is, you know that the writing is a process for her of kind of incorporating her experiences into herself in a way that allows her to move to kind of heal and move forward. But her purpose is also to reach out to other people who are experiencing the kind of grief and loss that she has faced. And what I find, what's interesting when we review it, is that you feel when you read the writing of someone like that, it makes you realize how relatively easy your own life is to the lives of people in parts of the world that are war torn. And it makes you sort of humble about your own problems, but it doesn't mean that you have to disregard or say, well, how can I have problems if, there's so much more difficult things going on in other parts of the world. Humans are such that I think that it's almost like our capacity for pain sort of fills up the space of whatever is going on in our lives, but yet also our capacity to deal with what's happening in our lives. There are a lot of different challenges that people are facing. And I think one of the reasons I love writing and reading is that I can both capture what is my present, what's going on with me, but I can also experience what other people are experiencing so that I can broaden my own sense of what the human condition is. And it gives a certain humility, as you face your own life, and a realization that, there are people that face difficulties that are hugely greater than mine, but it doesn't mean you can't own your own suffering of whatever form it takes. I'm not sure whether that was a good answer to your question, but it was kind of what popped into my mind as I was thinking it over.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a similar example. Sometimes our writing gets into the experiences we've had. Some of them are painful, some of them are joyous, some of them are inspirational. We want to use some of these things as inspirational, or some of them might be joyful. Like you've did a lot of work with the positive psychology components. What I found, and I think there's a famous quote around this, is that when we actually dig in, you talk about humility, you talk about our ability to be vulnerable with these experiences. And I get moved when people use this pain as a form of medicine to help others kind of recognize they're not alone. Because there are folks in other war-torn areas that have struggled or are struggling. Even today's day and age, there's some wars popping up that are concerning for many of us and for the world. And there's so many people that can relate. And I think with my friend Donna, there's many of the stories that she's gone through. Why she initially wrote it is she thought she could help people that have gone through some of these things that maybe people don't want to admit, and how she got through it and how she was able to overcome it. Doesn't mean it doesn't haunt her at times, yet she knows she can get through it because she's done it before. And she shows and identifies ways to overcome it, or to make sure you look at the light instead of the darkness, right? Doesn't mean it goes away. It's kind of creating the habits in anything that we can overcome and see the brightness of what's ahead and what's possible. So I just feel like writing is such an important thing. I mean, I also think, like, congrats on your book, and it's like you're leaving a legacy for family, for when 100 years from now it's still going to be around. Who knows the form of it, right? Well, books, paperbacks exist anymore, who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool thing. Your legacy is here. You've left an imprint, right? You said you wanted to make an impact. You've made a tremendous impact on me, and I'm making impacts hopefully on other people. You're making an impact on hundreds and thousands and ultimately millions. You're not even aware yet how you're impacting people, because I think the work you're doing with the book and the workshop are fabulous. And I know some of this is really based on that positive psychology work that you've done. And I want to pivot there. But before we do, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to react to or respond to based on what I just shared.
One of the things that's been going through my mind a lot recently is the realization that people change over time. And in particular, a lot of times we will come to a judgment about somebody else based on exactly where they are and what they're doing right now. And one of the things that I realized when my kids were growing up was they change, they get different, they mature, there are things that they couldn't do that they can do now, and so there are people, for example, in their teens and 20s who will be different when they're in their 30s and 40s. And part of it is holding out, giving people the chance to change, not getting them fixed in our minds that this person is this particular way, but being aware that, well, this person is this particular way right now. But, time will change them. Growing up will change them. Experiences will change them. And being open to the fact that people change over time and letting people change for the better, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's back to the whole open-mindedness, having your heart open to not judge people and see where people evolve to and help people too. I think acceptance is big, having compassion are all, elements that I think are critical. And I can only imagine some of that does apply back to that whole positive psychology. You're one of the first classes. Like, I'd love to learn more about that, because you've given some examples about where you've worked, and I'm curious on, what drove you to go back and get your master's in, applied positive psychology. Cultures are still evolving, and there's more of a desire for more positive thinking, more empathy, more engagement with people, people first, inclusive behaviors. We are seeing a shift, but it's taken a long time. So I'm curious about what your reaction is to all that.
Well, I think that workplaces can definitely improve. Okay. And I'm not in the middle of, I now work for myself. So if I want to go complain to my boss, I go to the bathroom and look in the mirror. So it's a little bit different than it used to be. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm a really strong believer that people need to take ownership of their own time, and that there's a tendency, when I was working for IBM, there was a tendency for people to brag, oh, I work 60 hours a week. Oh, I work 65 hours a week. Oh, I work 70 hours a week. And I remember thinking, the more fool you, which is, because what was happening when I was growing up, my mother used to say to us that wage earners get paid by the hour, but professionals get paid, they get a a payment, but they work until the job is done. Well, the employers figured that out, and they said, "Oh, we've got a bunch of people who work till the job is done. Let's just keep making the job bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger," until it got to the point that people are losing their lives in their work. And I'm a believer. I've actually wrote a LinkedIn post about this, that we need to take some ownership of our time, sort of make up our minds about how much time we're actually going to let our jobs take from us. And particularly, the whole who's in control. Is it the employer or the employee? Who's the buyer, who's the seller, and is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? That changes over time. I've seen several different curves like this, and I know people are afraid. Well, if I don't do everything that's asked of me, then I'll lose my job, and that may be true. But the question is, how long can you work such terrible without having it affect your physical, mental, and emotional health? And is it worth it to you? And so if it's a matter of, I just think to take some ownership of, this is what I have that I'm willing to share with my job, and to not be passive about it and let yourself sort of passively drift into working your entire life, but also to be intentional about how you manage your priorities. And in particular, I have another article on LinkedIn that is actually one of my favorites. It's a whole question of how you negotiate with your boss, having big rocks discussions. And the idea of a big rocks discussion is, you've probably seen that meme that says, if you've got a jar and you have a pile of sand and a pile of medium-sized rocks and a pile of big rocks, if you put the sand in first and then medium-sized rocks and then big rocks, you get a whole lot less in the jar than if you put the big rocks in first, then the medium-sized rocks, and then the sand. So the idea that I used to have these conversations with a manager that I really loved working for. We'd have them every 2 weeks. I was a very high-level person at that point, so most people would have said, well, you should be figuring out what you need to do yourself. But she and I agreed on this process, and we would have these discussions, and I'd go into her every 2 weeks and I'd have a list. These are what I think my big rocks are. And she'd look at them and say, well, that's a big rock and that's a big rock. I think you should just finish this one up or forget about it for now. But you don't have a big rock that I think should be there. And so we would have these conversations every 2 weeks with the understanding that there was no way in the world that I could do absolutely everything that was on my plate. So I needed to know if anything was going to fall off my plate, what I needed to make sure that anything that fell off my plate was the sand and the tiny rocks and not the big rocks. So that kind of negotiation of, this is what my job is going to be like in this period of time, can be tremendously helpful.
Yeah, that gave you perspective, where to prioritize, right? So you could actually have more success, and I would hope more joy within the job. I'm glad you had a good boss that you worked with there to help guide and help you with that. In general, as you think about the workplace, like, how do you view joy in the workplace? What does that look like?
Well, to me, is first of all psychological safety. That is the ability for everybody that's there to be themselves, to not have to have a personality transplant to fit in, but to be part of the whole. So everybody to have an experience of contributing to the whole. Secondly, it's working on something that has some meaning to it, so that where you can imagine how it's affecting making the world a better place because you're spending your time doing it. So, and thirdly, I've always loved working in teams and working with other people, but this recognition that people are different and people have different ways of contributing, and having a certain humor and tolerance and openness to the differences in people, so that they can work together in a way that moves things forward. And so those, I think, are sort of elements of a joyful job, is having it be meaningful, making some kind of a difference in the world, positive difference in the world, feeling like everybody's safe to be themselves, have expectations. I'm not saying everybody can just come in and play games on their computers all day. I mean, actually, but to be able to contribute in a way that uses their talents and their abilities, and appreciating the fact that there are different ways of contributing.
Love it. I also go back to what you said about, having an impact, making a difference, and how you change gears with your writing, your writing workshops. One of my last questions, I'm just curious, I like to ask, was there like a light up moment that really got you to shift gears after 30 years as a software engineer, and, you wanted to make a greater impact? Was there something that happened? Were there events, or did you just say, I need to make a change at this point in my life?
Oh, I've been looking for a change for probably 5 to 10 years, and have been experimenting with possibilities. There was one point when I took a leave of absence to work for the local school system on a project where I interviewed all of the sixth grade teachers in the district to figure out, well, what helps you personally the most. Working in my town, there's a huge number of PhD parents, and there's a lot of working class people. So there's a huge range of what kind of background kids come from, how much enrichment they have at home, etc. When my daughter was going into kindergarten, I remember going to a meeting about, how to help your kid in kindergarten. It turned out it was a meeting that was intended for a housing project. And the big discussion there was how to make sure your kid gets read to. And they were saying, if you don't really read well yourself, maybe you can work out something with your neighbor so that your child can be read to, which opened my eyes to what a difference my kids, we did a lot of reading to our children all the time, and realizing what a difference that can make, and that it's a difference that not everybody gets. So anyway, I interviewed every sixth grade teacher in the district to say, how do you deal with this range of abilities in the classroom? And then I put together a report about best practices that could then be used across the district. I think what I'm trying to say is that finding your way is a matter of trying things and seeing what works. And then when it doesn't work, trying something else, which is, of course, the whole experimental approach of my book. But it's also the approach that I've used in my life. I try things. I realize that I need to do something for at least probably 3, 6, maybe a little bit longer months before I can really judge, because there's a discomfort when you try something new. So you can't judge what you're doing based on that discomfort. So waiting and saying, but getting to a point where you say, is this me or is this not? And when I get to the point where you say it's not, then kind of pulling out and then trying something else. So I'm in the middle of doing that right now. As I mentioned to you before we started the call, I'm in a bit of a sense of needing to have some change in my life, and I'm not really sure what comes next. And I'm in what my friends call a neutral period, where, I'm ending some things and I'm not quite sure what I'm starting. But that's being able to view that as a time of possible creativity, that, sort of seeing what'll bubble up. I'm trying to view it, though it's an uncomfortable period. I have to tell you, it's not like it's fun necessarily to feel like you're in a tiny bit of a slump. So, but I'm trying to look at it as a time where there's a possibility of a future growth and a new adventure.
Yeah, I like the positive angle on that, and the recognition that it's not feeling so good either. So I appreciate that. And, you're putting it out there. Hopefully this podcast, and then maybe when you go out in the garden, you'll start to kind of think of what could be next, what's possible. And
what could be next?
Yeah, I love it. One last question is for the audience, and you've shared a few ideas with folks already. How do you get started with writing? It's like someone that's interested to get going. Like, what can I do to start tomorrow or tonight? What can I do?
I think pick something. Okay, so pick something that that you can imagine caring about, or that you can imagine somebody else caring about, and then sit down and just, some people do it best by dictating. I had one person who was having trouble getting a first draft done, and I said, well, what if you explained your idea to a friend out loud? Well, nowadays there's all kinds of tools you can use where you can actually speak, and then you'll get written text come out of it. So think about what's your easiest form of expression, and then pick some small thing that you want to capture. And it might be, this is what my child is doing right now at this particular moment, and I want to capture it so that he can appreciate it later when he's like 20 years older. He can appreciate that this was what was happening right now. Or are you thinking about somebody? I've been thinking a lot about my mother, and thinking about how my memories of her are very affected by the way she was in her very last years. So I've been trying to go back and pull ideas from what she was like, talk to people and get ideas from what she was like at an earlier age and sort of refresh that part of my memory of her. So I guess what I'm saying is just pick something to do and do it, And if you need more ideas, I've got some ideas you can try. Think of it as an experiment. Think of it as trying things, some of which will work, some of which won't. If they don't work, you lay them aside and you say, well, I've learned something about myself. If they do work, or they sort of work, but you do need to change them a little bit to make them fit you, go ahead and change them. This is you figuring out your approach to the writing.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that. And I know your personal mission is to help us develop our personal voices and to be heard that way. And, I appreciate you so much. And you've certainly helped me with my book and my path and my journey. And it is about our personal path and way. It's not about ChatGPT or any other AI tools to kind of create our voices. It's our voice that we're bringing out to the world. And you're helping so many people do that. And again, I'm so thankful for what you're doing. And I really invite people to go check out your workbook, your book, your workshops. I would really encourage people to join your workshops. I think it was transformational for me, and I think it will be for other folks, because it does get you to commit to writing and being open-minded to learn, but also to provide feedback. You learn how to give constructive, positive feedback too. So, Kathryn, I'm so thankful for you to be on the show. I'm honored to be friends, and again, I'm so grateful for everything you've instilled in me.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to speak to you, Darrin. You're a very fun interviewer. So just want to give you that feedback. So you've made my mind go off in a bunch of funny little pathways that I hadn't really thought ahead of time that we might approach, but that makes it particularly fun.
What a treat to spend some time with Kathryn. She has such a way with words. In fact, she encouraged us to sit, write, share, and change the world. Capture ideas, voice, and stories in the words that matter to you. It will help you define your legacy and even live it authentically. I hope today's episode sets you up on your path. Be sure to pick up her book and workbook. Even consider attending her writing workshops to fill you with confidence and courage, like it did for me. I hope to see you there. Keep experimenting and aligning with your happy, authentic self, and you will live your best life possible. See you next time.
That's all for today's episode. If you liked the show, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Live Your Possible dares to unlock your fullest potential and become an avenue for others to do the same. Join the community by visiting ignitehappy.com. It's time to discover endless possibilities with equal opportunity for all. See you again next week for more insights on how you can live your possible.